I was scrolling online the other day and stumbled across this clip that, well, it perfectly captured this weird invisible tension. A shaky phone video, right? Shot on a really crowded Japanese train. And this guy is filming a woman just like a few feet away from him. And you can hear his voice. It's sharp, kind of self-righteous, telling her, you're not allowed to talk on the phone here. And technically, yeah, he's right. It's one of those, ironclad, unspoken rules in Japan. You just don't do it. But the woman glares back, totally defensive. I mean, how would you react if some stranger started scolding you and shoving a camera in your face? The irony, of course, is that filming someone like that without their okay is also breaking the rules. This perfect, bizarre little moment of just mutual misunderstanding. The guy is so focused on enforcing one rule, he completely ignored another one. The woman, maybe she didn't even know the rule, just reacting to being publicly shamed like that. It just crystallized this massive gap in understanding, And it made me think, who's actually in the wrong here?
That anecdote is, well, it's a perfect little snapshot, isn't it? A small-scale illustration of these huge underlying tensions we see today.
Yeah.
It's about these deeply entrenched social rules bumping up against modern tech, the smartphone, right? And boom, the tension just flares up because of misunderstanding and public shaming.
Exactly.
And when you zoom out, these little frictions, they're really symptoms of deep structural problems affecting modern society, especially in a place like Japan. It spans everything from massive economic pressures to the chaos of the digital world.
That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive for you today. We've gathered a whole bunch of material that really reveals just how profoundly Japan's urgent demographic crisis is forcing this painful public rethink of its identity, particularly around immigration and, how to integrate different cultures. It feels like a real crisis point where sheer necessity is challenging decades of really restrictive policy.
Precisely. And our mission today is kind of twofold. First, we're investigating how this demographic pressure, this absolute necessity, is forcing Japan to reconsider, maybe even tear down its historically restrictive immigration policies. There's this need for millions of foreign workers.
Millions. It's a huge number.
It really is. And then second, we're going to pivot and analyze how the friction that results from this, the friction on the ground between migrant workers and employers and the friction in the abstract digital space, how all that is shaping, amplifying, and often, frankly, poisoning the public conversation around these huge necessary changes.
So we're looking at two massive pressures hitting modern Japan at the same time. The aging population and this wild digital information environment.
Exactly. Two powerful forces colliding.
Okay, so let's start where any policy discussion really has to begin. The cold, hard numbers.
Yeah.
Because they tell this undeniable story of society basically hitting a demographic cliff edge. The main driver for this whole painful policy shift is just simple necessity. Japan's fertility rate has plummeted. It's down to 1.3 children per woman.
And 1.3 is just staggeringly far below the 2.1 rate you need just to keep a population stable. It's not a sudden drop either. It's been a steady, decades-long decline that has completely, utterly upended the country's age structure.
Right.
Japan currently has the second oldest population in the world. I mean, think about this statistic for a second. More than 1 in 10 people in Japan are now aged 80 or older.
Wow. 1 in 10 people, 80 or older. You can immediately see the kind of ripple effect that has across the entire economy, the whole social infrastructure.
Absolutely. It creates this immense fiscal burden. You see rapidly rising costs for things like pensions, healthcare, Social Security.
And who's supposed to be funding all this?
Well, the tax base, right? The working age population.
Yeah.
And that group is simultaneously shrinking and shrinking rapidly.
So more costs, fewer people paying taxes to cover them, that's not sustainable.
Not at all. The country is literally running out of young people to fill essential jobs. And we're not just talking about high-tech manufacturing here. We're talking fundamental services, nursing, elder care, agriculture, construction.
Yeah, the basics.
This isn't some abstract economic theory you read about. This is the day-to-day reality of trying to staff a rural hospital or just maintain the national infrastructure.
And the government's own economic growth targets only underscore how desperate the need for labor has become. To maintain even, modest growth and stay solvent, the Japanese government calculated they need an estimated 6.74 million foreign workers by 2040.
6.74 million. And just to put that into perspective for you, that is nearly 4 times the number of foreign workers Japan had just a few years back in 2020. It represents a massive, massive shift in national policy thinking.
4 times the number by 2040.
But it does raise a crucial question, doesn't it? Is that target 6.74 million workers in less than 2 decades, is that actually realistic? problematic, especially given the country's long history of resisting immigration and, frankly, its current failures in integration.
That's a huge question.
They're setting a target that might require measures so drastic they can just overwhelm the social services that are already creaking under the strain from depopulation in the first place.
It definitely feels like they're aiming for a kind of change in velocity that the existing political and social structures just aren't ready for. This demographic panic runs smack into Japan's historical resistance. For decades, Japan really cultivated this image, this reputation, as an isolated, homogenous, sort of insular nation, and its policies reflected that.
That historical resistance, it's actually codified in law. The 1952 Immigration Control and a Refugee Act was incredibly restrictive. It generally only allowed entry for high-skilled workers or people of Japanese descent, the Nikkaijin.
Right.
This policy maintained really tight, centralized control over who could actually come into the nation's workforce.
And what's fascinating, or maybe ironic, is that even when the economy was booming in the 1980s, attracting global attention, the government didn't really relax the core policies to let in the manual labor they clearly needed then. They actually doubled down.
They did. In 1990, the law was amended specifically to tighten the requirements for work visas even further, explicitly only permitting high-skilled professionals. The public policy stance was crystal clear. We do not need low-skilled labor.
But the reality on the ground completely contradicted the law.
Yeah.
And that creates this profound paradox, right?
Exactly. Restricting the entry of low-skilled workers didn't make the need for them magically disappear.
No.
It just pushed that demand into unofficial, less regulated channels, which basically ensured that the labor they did acquire was cheaper and had fewer protections.
So it was a system kind of built on hypocrisy from the start.
Pretty much. That 1990 amendment inadvertently set up this whole system of loopholes that allowed the importation of essential manual labor without ever having to publicly admit they were workers. You mentioned the Nikkaijin exception, mostly people from Brazil or Peru, that created a backdoor for manual labor suddenly needed in places like the auto industry.
Right.
And crucially, it laid the groundwork for the most controversial and frankly exploitative side door program we need to talk about next. The Technical Intern Training Program.
Okay, let's unpack that system, the TITP, the Technical Intern Training Program. This was set up in the 1990s, basically as the main side door to get foreign workers into those low-skilled Japanese jobs that Japanese nationals were increasingly shunning. But the official government story around it was, well, a complete fiction.
It was a beautiful piece of bureaucratic misdirection, really, designed specifically to sidestep those 1990 legal restrictions we just talked about. The official stated purpose was all about international cooperation.
Right, the noble cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Transferring advanced Japanese technical skills to workers from developing countries, supposedly so they could benefit their home economies when they went back. The underlying assumption always was that these workers would leave.
But that was never really the reality, was it?
Not at all. TITP very quickly became this exploitative pipeline for cheap, short-term labor. It funneled these workers into sectors like agriculture, seafood processing, food manufacturing, construction, the exact jobs the government publicly claimed they weren't importing labor for.
The very definition of a policy paradox.
And because of that core fiction, that they were trainees, not workers, they could be subjected to just egregious abuse.
What?
The whole system was designed to limit their rights and their ability to move jobs. We have extensive documentation showing workers paid far below minimum wage, forced into brutally long hours, often working in unsafe conditions.
Terrible.
And initially, these workers didn't even have access to basic social benefits like public housing or even adequate health care sometimes, which just made them incredibly vulnerable and totally dependent on their employers.
The human cost of this fictional policy, is profound. And it often gets forgotten in these big policy debates. Between just 2012 and 2017 alone, investigations found that 171 trainees actually died while in the program.
171 deaths?
Yeah. And there were 759 documented cases of suspected abuse that includes physical violence, illegal wage deductions. That isn't just, an inefficiency. That's a human rights failure on a massive scale that was allowed to go on for years because the program was structurally designed to treat people like temporary objects, not protected workers.
And that temporary nature, that transience, was actually cemented by policy during economic downturns. Remember the 2008 Great Recession? When Japan faced that slowdown, they implemented a literal pay-to-leave initiative. The government offered low-skilled foreign workers $3,000, which was a significant chunk of money for them to encourage them to just emigrate immediately.
Wow, just Here's money, please leave.
Pretty much. And roughly 20,000 foreign workers left by 2010 through that program. It just demonstrates how transient and, frankly, devalued that essential labor force was seen to be. The government was willing to pay people to leave rather than even try to integrate them during a recession.
But that whole structural fiction, it's finally being torn down, isn't it? Simply out of necessity.
Exactly. The demographic cliff has basically made TITP obsolete and unsustainable. The official abolishment of TITP was announced in March 2024. And yes, part of the motivation was these widespread human rights concerns that had become impossible to ignore. It's set to be replaced by the new skill developing program, or the Ikuse Shuro system, by 2027.
And this philosophical shift seems key here. TITP was built on the idea that workers must go home. Ikuse Shuro seems designed with the opposite premise. Japan needs them to stay.
That's the fundamental difference. The new system will allow workers to transfer workplaces, which is huge. It stops workers from being effectively chained to a single, potentially abusive employer, and it offers a much clearer path to long-term residency.
So this shift lets us contrast that old exploitative side door with the current front door schemes, the ones designed for the 21st century.
Right. We basically have two major pillars in place now. The High-Skilled Foreign Professionals, or HSFP program, and the Specified Skilled Worker, or SSW program.
The HSFP program, that started back in 2012, right? That's purely for attracting the top-tier talent scientists, researchers, senior business executives.
Exactly. It's a transparent, points-based system. You need 70 points across different categories like advanced research, your professional career history, even age plays a role. And the benefits are significant, designed to lure the global elite, relaxed rules for bringing family, even domestic servants in some cases.
So that's the elite track.
Yeah.
But the SSW program, created in 2019, that's more the working track. And that seems to represent the real scale of Japan's new labor commitment.
It absolutely is. It targets what they call middle-skilled workers in industries facing acute labor shortages, nursing, construction, and especially agriculture, as we've seen. It offers an up to 5-year visa initially, comparable salaries to Japanese workers, and there's mandated support for things like housing and orientation.
So is the SSW system effectively creating that working track Japan needs, separate from the HSFP elite track? And how does that split maybe shape the public's view of foreign labor?
It definitely does create that stratification. And the SSW track has a major hurdle that kind of reinforces its position. Workers have to pass a pretty difficult Japanese language proficiency test, the N4 level, or equivalent professional exams in their field.
Okay, so there's a barrier there.
There is. It acts as a sort of quality control, but it also filters the applicant pool quite severely. Nonetheless, the sheer scale of the commitment is massive. Japan expects to accept an estimated 820,000 foreign SSW workers in the next 5 years alone.
820,000 in 5 years.
Yeah. This is definitive structural proof that the government has finally accepted that foreign labor is now a permanent national project, not just some temporary fix like TITP pretended to be.
Okay, so while the government is signaling this massive policy shift, recognizing foreign labor through these new front doors, the policy hits reality on the ground, the gemba, as they say. And that's where we start to see some profound friction and contradiction.
Definitely. And here we run right into the central contradiction of the SSW program, this whole skill issue. Officially, the government labels these incoming workers specified skilled. They promote this idea of a rapid deployment force that's ready to hit the ground running.
Right. Sounds efficient.
But when you actually talk to the employers, especially in essential sectors like agriculture, they tell a very, very different story.
What are they saying?
Well, farmers who are absolutely desperate for steady, low-cost manual labor often find that the new SSW workers, even those who've already done the TITP program, need extensive training from scratch.
Really? Even after TITP?
Yeah. Training in their specific regional farm methods, the crops are different, the soil, the climate, it all requires local knowledge that you just don't get from a generic program.
So that completely undermines the government's idea of this rapid deployment force that can just jump in and be productive immediately.
Absolutely. Our sources show farmer employers widely see both TITP and SSW workers as doing basically simple manual work. One leading farmer we looked at even suggested simplifying the visa name to just special work visa.
Interesting. Why?
He argued that the official public stance that SSW labor is somehow skilled is just contradicted by their daily reality. He saw it as unnecessary bureaucratic overhead that didn't reflect the actual job.
And on the worker side, what's their motivation? Is it still mostly economic?
Overwhelmingly, yes. Workers often come primarily to earn money to send back home, not for some lofty goal of technical transfer, despite that official rhetoric that persisted for 3 decades. That fundamental disconnect between the government's stated purpose and the workers' actual reality is really the root of the exploitation that unfortunately continues even within the new SSW system.
Let's look more closely at those employer perspectives then, because they seem to be struggling with these new regulations and cost structures too.
They are. The persistent problem of broker fees is a prime example. These agencies, often based in the workers' home countries, exploit the workers at every step of the journey.
How so?
We encountered this specific anecdote involving a vegetable and fruit farmer in Aichi Prefecture. He had a Cambodian worker who was switching status from TITP to the new SSW visa.
Okay.
The worker's original sending agency back in Cambodia demanded an extortionate fee, 250,000 yen, which is a lot of money just to issue a basic work certificate, just a piece of paper proving the worker had been in Japan under TITP.
250,000 yen for a certificate? That sounds outrageous.
The farmer was furious. He pointed out, quite rightly, that the sending agency was doing absolutely nothing for him or the worker during this transition, yet they were demanding this huge fee that would saddle the worker with debt before he even started the new job properly.
So what happened?
Unless the farmer disputed it or absorbed the cost, which he ended up doing partially, agreeing to pay 2,500 yen a month towards it, the worker would have been severely exploited by his own agency back home. It would have forced him into a kind of debt bondage situation.
And that just reveals that the structural problem workers being fundamentally tied to these potentially exploitative sending agencies, it still exists, even within the reformed SSW framework.
Exactly. It hasn't gone away.
And beyond the financial exploitation, there's this challenging cultural shift too, something researchers call the defamilizing relationship. Can you explain that?
Sure. Traditionally, especially on smaller family-run farms, TITP workers were often managed hierarchically, almost like which means like a child or a pseudo-family member.
Oh, okay.
The expectation was often that they were just always available, working long hours off the clock, sometimes treated like indentured servants whose lives revolved entirely around the farm.
Right, not really like an employee with rights.
Not at all. But the shift to the SSW status legally requires treating these migrants as formal workers with explicit rights. Paid holidays, set working hours, restrictions on excessive overtime. This change really undermines the reliance on cheap, flexible, always available labor that many farm businesses had kind of built their models around.
And I imagine there's resistance to that, especially from older farmers maybe.
Definitely. We saw evidence of that. One farmer complained that this reform of working style, as he put it, prevents those with aspirations and dreams from making efforts, and that Japan's development has basically stopped because of it.
Wow. So they see these new protections as undermining the entrepreneurial spirit needed for farming.
Yeah, rather than seeing it as correcting a fundamental human rights imbalance that existed under TITP.
That's a significant disconnect.
It is. And even where employers are trying to comply with the new rules, the institutional support for worker advancement, for career progression, is virtually non-existent in many cases.
What do you mean?
Farmer employers readily admit that formal promotion systems or pay rises based on seniority or actual skill acquisition like getting a truck driver's license or learning computer skills for farm management, those things are extremely rare.
So it reinforces the idea that these workers were just temporary, low-cost labor, not long-term contributors with a real career path ahead of them.
Precisely. It keeps them stuck.
And this brings us right to the core structural barriers that actively hinder integration once workers arrive and actually try to settle in Japan. One staggering fact is that Japan is the only developed democracy without a comprehensive anti-discrimination law.
It's quite shocking when you think about it that lack of legal protection means that immigrants who face clear bias, maybe in finding housing or getting hired or just in daily social situations, they often have no real legal recourse. They can't seek justice effectively.
And what about support for learning the language and culture?
Again, official state support is minimal. It often relies on underfunded, pretty disorganized groups of unpaid volunteers. And while these volunteers are usually well-meaning, they simply cannot handle the scale of the integration challenge Japan is now facing.
So what's the outcome of all these systemic barriers? We came across this term, negative assimilation. Can you elaborate on what that means practically for the listener?
Sure. So positive assimilation is what you'd hope for. It's when an immigrant's earnings gradually increase over time as they gain cultural familiarity, better language skills, build networks, and so on.
Right. They integrate and move up.
Exactly. Negative assimilation is the opposite. In Japan, foreign nationals earn, on average, 28% less than Japanese workers doing similar work. And this gap doesn't close over time. It actually gets exacerbated by structural issues like job restrictions that get trapped in low-wage sectors and social discrimination in hiring and promotion.
So practically speaking, a worker might start the SSW program with that promise of comparable pay. But if they're constantly blocked from promotion, restricted to manual labor jobs, face housing discrimination, they're basically prevented from improving their economic standing. It creates a permanent economically marginalized underclass over time.
That's the danger. Exactly. And this failure to properly support integration is about to become an even greater imperative for the state. Why? Because of the recent extension of the SSW2 visa, specifically in agriculture.
What does that extension do?
It allows for family reunification. Workers can now potentially stay much longer, up to 10 years, or even indefinitely in some cases. And crucially, they can bring their spouses and children.
Okay, that's a game changer.
It fundamentally shifts integration from being just an employer concern or maybe a local community concern to being a comprehensive national infrastructure necessity. If the state doesn't step up and fund the necessary social infrastructure, we're talking high-quality Japanese language support, real housing assistance, proper educational support for children, then Japan risks replicating the problems seen in other countries.
Like creating marginalized communities.
Exactly, where families live in the country for long periods, maybe even generations, but lack the necessary support for social mobility, leading to profound marginalization and social friction down the line. The integration challenge is no longer optional. It's baked right into the structure of these new policies. Okay, so we've established this deep structural friction happening on the farms within the visa process itself, the sort of physical economic reality of this huge policy shift. Now, we really need to pivot and analyze how the national conversation, this abstract digital space, takes these very real tensions and amplifies them, maybe even poisons the whole debate.
Right. This shift to digital friction seems to have started with what you could only call a big bang in the public information space. Before the internet, information was relatively slow, mostly one way, and controlled by, trained professionals, journalists.
Exactly. Now, the space is bidirectional. Everyone's a publisher. It's real-time, instantaneous, and it's just flooded with user-generated content, some credible, a lot of it unreliable, or worse.
And the rise of generative AI has just thrown gasoline on that fire, hasn't it?
Dramatically accelerated it. We're now facing what some call an information tsunami of plausible falsehoods, content that's manufactured quickly, cheaply, designed to look authentic, making it almost impossible for the average person to verify facts in real time.
It's overwhelming. Yeah. And the engine driving all of this isn't civic duty or truth-seeking, it's the attention economy.
Precisely. Human time and attention are the ultimate scarce commodities online. And the whole system is engineered to monetize immediate, reflexive reactions. Content that provokes strong emotional stimuli, fear, outrage, self-righteousness, like that train anecdote you started with, gets maximum visibility and therefore maximum financial benefit completely, regardless of whether it's accurate or not.
So it rewards reaction over reflection.
It absolutely does. It risks diminishing what psychologists call System 2 thinking. That's the careful, analytical deliberation we need for rational decisions in a democracy in favor of System 1 thinking, which is immediate, emotional, reflexive. When you open a social media app, the whole system is pushing you to react instantly, not to think deeply.
And this monetization of gut reaction leads directly to ideological polarization, doesn't it? Through personalized algorithms creating what we call filter bubbles and echo chambers.
Exactly. They essentially encase users in these information cocoons.
Information cocoons. I like that term.
It leads to what's been called information malnutrition. Users are primarily fed information judged reliant by the algorithm, which usually just means stuff that confirms their existing biases.
Right. It feels good to be agreed with.
It does. And when individuals mainly hang out with like-minded people inside these bubbles, it accelerates something called group polarization. People become less willing to even engage in dialogue with anyone who thinks differently, and they often get pushed towards more radical, extreme positions.
And we see this system being directly exploited by political actors, right? Who use these structural weaknesses to basically monetize fear and gain political traction. The far-right party, Sansaitu, seems like a key example here. They gained a lot of ground recently, focusing on classic populist ideas framed within this digital friend-enemy dynamic.
Absolutely. Their core narratives cleverly link the necessity of immigration, which we established earlier is driven by demographics, to these conspiracy theories about a corrupt political establishment at home and shadowy globalist elites who are supposedly engineering an uncontrollable flood of criminal foreigners.
So they take genuine, complex economic anxiety
And simplify it into a clear external threat. It's classic populism, supercharged by digital tools.
Their leader, Kamiya Suhei, has been described as a conspiracy entrepreneur. That sounds about right.
It's an apt description. He uses social media platforms, especially YouTube, as his native ecosystem. He doesn't really rely on traditional media. He generates highly monetizable content that pushes far-right ideologies and often historical revisionism.
Yeah, and it works for him.
His strategy is quite sophisticated. Economically, the controversial, high-stimulus content generates profit through ads and subscriptions. Politically, it creates what academics call discursive disruption. It's designed to undermine the democratic institutions and establish media outlets that might challenge his narratives.
So it's a feedback loop. The algorithm rewards the inflammatory content, and that content drives political gains and more revenue.
Exactly. The algorithm rewards fear, and the fear drives political engagement and profit. And these echo chambers become fertile ground for all sorts of conspiracy beliefs that often go way beyond just immigration.
How so?
Individuals who buy into Senseichu's anti-globalist immigration narrative often seem to adopt other, seemingly unrelated theories as well.
Like what?
We see this pattern clearly. Adherence to claims like COVID-19 being an international fraud, belief in U.S. election fraud conspiracies, or interpreting the 2022 Ukraine invasion not as Russian aggression, but as some kind of attack on the deep state.
Wow. These things seem completely unconnected.
They are, logically, but they get shared and reinforced within these closed digital environments. And this stuff has severe real-world consequences. We hear about profound rifts within families, spouses separating over vaccination conspiracies, family members cutting off contact due to political radicalization fueled online.
That's really disturbing. And what's particularly alarming is how vulnerable the Japanese public seems to be to this kind of manipulation. A survey found that only 19% of Japanese respondents had what was considered good information hygiene levels.
Yeah, that's things like actually verifying information before sharing, intentionally seeking out diverse sources, trying to avoid echo chambers. Only 19% in Japan compared to about 26% internationally in that same survey.
And familiarity with the basic concepts driving this is strikingly low, too.
Very low. Less than 27% of Japanese respondents were familiar with core concepts like echo chamber, attention economy, or filter bubble. I mean, if you don't even know the names for the mechanisms being used to manipulate you, how can you possibly protect yourself against them?
That's a fair point. And there's that classic cognitive bias at play, too, isn't there? Where people recognize the problem generally but think they're immune.
Exactly. Most individuals in the survey subjectively felt their news consumption was biased, and they expressed a general lack of trust in information sources overall, yet they often believed their own personal information health was better than their peers. Their average self-assessment score was 56.4 out of 100.
So the problem is real, but it's other people who are falling for it, not me.
Precisely. They recognize the societal problem, but assume they, personally, are fine, which of course makes them even more vulnerable.
Okay, so we've laid out how the problem is really rooted in these deep structural systems. You've got exploitative immigration policies on one hand, and this toxic digital information environment driven by profit incentives on the other. The path forward really requires a unified, proactive approach across society.
And that approach has to start with defining and actively striving for something called information health.
Exactly. Think of it like physical health. Information health means consciously consuming diverse, well-rounded information, treating your information intake like you treat a balanced diet. We absolutely have to move away from rewarding that reflexive System 1 gut reaction and towards fostering deliberate System 2 critical thinking.
That sounds like a huge cultural shift, though. It is. It's massive. And a huge part of the responsibility here has to fall on the digital platforms themselves. After all, they built the systems that are currently monetizing fragmentation and polarization. We need significant governance changes and technological reforms to push them away from the pure attention economy model.
So what does that kind of reform actually look like for the big platform operators? What could they do?
Well, first and foremost, transparency. Platforms absolutely must disclose the parameters and the methodologies behind their algorithms. If we, the public, don't know how they're weighing values, what they're prioritizing, we can't hold them accountable.
Makes sense. Know what the machine is doing.
Second, they need to address content balance. Algorithms shouldn't just feed you more of what you already like. They should be actively adjusted to intentionally expose users to a broader, non-personalized range of content, viewpoints from outside their bubble, or at least give users meaningful control to adjust their own personalization levels.
That's a fascinating idea. It's almost the opposite of their current business model, isn't it? Instead of just giving users what they want to click on to maximize engagement.
They should be helping users find what they need to see to be well-informed citizens in a democracy.
Okay. What else?
To help users navigate this, platforms could implement information checkup tools. These would be personalized features, maybe in your settings, that assess the diversity and perhaps the reliability of the sources you're consuming. They could even calculate the likely degree of your filter bubble influence. It's about making the abstract visible and measurable for the individual user.
I love that idea we came across about potentially gamifying this, like creating a personalized avatar, a sort of virtual you that visually reflects your information health.
It's a really interesting psychological nudge, isn't it? Imagine if you only consume sensational headlines, never click through to the source, never engage with different viewpoints. Maybe your avatar starts looking metaphorically overweight or sluggish.
Right. Prompting you to balance your information diet.
Exactly. It makes the problem tangible and personally relevant in a way abstract warnings just don't.
Okay, and another essential technological piece seems to be addressing that information tsunami. We talked about the flood of plausible fakes generated by AI. How do we verify content authenticity in that environment?
That requires something that's being developed called originator profile, or OP technology. The idea is to create a mechanism that ensures content authenticity by displaying digitally signed information about the creator.
Like a digital watermark.
Sort of, but more informative. It would show the creator's identity, maybe their editorial standards or track record for accuracy, potentially verified by a trusted third party. Think of it as a digital signature that establishes credibility before you even engage with the content. Who is really behind this information?
That could be powerful. And given the political exploitation we discussed with groups like Sensaito, there seems to be a clear need for maybe exceptional measures during critical democratic moments like elections. We can't just let the attention economy run wild then.
Absolutely not. During key democratic events, elections, major referendums platforms arguably have a civic duty to temporarily shift priorities away from maximizing engagement and towards ensuring fairness and informed participation.
What would that look like? An elections mode?
Something like that. A temporary mode where the platform actively works to broadly disseminate fair, balanced policy information from diverse, credible sources. And crucially, it would need controls to slow the rapid, reflexive spread of misinformation and disinformation, perhaps prioritizing content from highly reliable, verified media outlets over sensational, unverified user-generated stuff during that critical period.
So when we wrap this all up, it really sounds like both Japan's immigration crisis and its information crisis require the same fundamental commitment, don't they? Moving away from policies and systems built on fiction or exploitation and towards dealing with structural reality.
That really is the crux of it, I think. Achieving a sustainable future for Japan, and arguably for many modern democracies, requires overcoming these convenient fictions, like the pretense that TITP was just training, or the idea that the attention economy's focus on manipulation is somehow neutral or harmless.
Right.
These deep structural challenges, like discrimination in the labor market preventing real integration, and digital polarization fueled by algorithms, they aren't just minor irritations. They pose a continuous, serious threat to democratic health and social cohesion. Addressing them requires ongoing, multidisciplinary commitment from government, from businesses, and frankly, from all of us as users, to actively promote fairness, critical thinking, and genuine, properly supported integration both in the physical world and the digital one.